You're listening to the Footballogists with Kevin Gillikin and the Skipper Dude, covering the basics of sports betting.
You got an extra 2.5 points, so you won the bet 30.5 to 30. That's how point spreads work.
In-depth analysis of every NFL spread.
So Vegas is giving Baltimore with the win and 4 points to do so. Now, I think that's a crazy bet. Baltimore is a really good team. Miami is a terrible team. 4 points is not nearly enough. Baltimore should win by at least 1 touchdown. Easy. Bank it. Bet it.
Plus yearly and daily fantasy football.
Will he be the top fantasy quarterback for a year? No, but Jimmy Garoppolo is going to have a fantastic week 1. He's got all the people around him, and he's playing against a terrible Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense.
All with a focus on the human element.
We're talking about another Belichick disciple in his first year after almost zero experience as a coordinator in the NFL, and he has to somehow manage this quarterback situation with Josh Rosen and Ryan Fitzpatrick. Add that to Rosen's bad attitude and anything else going on in the Miami locker room, and it's just aiming for disaster for the season, for fantasy, for everything for the Miami Dolphins in 2019.
Please gamble responsibly.
I'm your host, Kevin Gillikin. Yes, this is the Footballogist, where we talk about all things NFL betting and fantasy with a focus on the human element. We'll talk injuries, coaching decisions, coaching schemes, drama in the locker room, everything that affects these football players as people. This week, we're going to talk about the AFC West, the Broncos, Chargers, Chiefs, and Raiders, a division close to my heart because I am a lifelong Broncos fan. But will the Broncos be able to even break 500? Will the Raiders take a step forward, or will the Chiefs and Chargers again dominate the division? Now, we're going to start off the show with the Skipper Dude, who's going to tell us again the basics of sports betting. If you've already listened to this segment, skip ahead until the 9:30 mark. Otherwise, definitely listen. It is a must listen for anyone who doesn't know the ins and outs of sports betting. Skipper Dude, up now.
Thanks, Kevin, for having me on and asking me to do a little overview of how NFL gambling works. I think this should be fun. So first of all, if you've ever been to a casino and you know how a casino works, you know that casinos don't actually make their money gambling. Casinos make their money facilitating gambling for others like you or me. If you play blackjack or craps or roulette, the casino is taking the other side of bets that you're laying down, but they've openly rigged the odds to where they will always win over time. Maybe not on 1 or 2 or even 10 particular gamblers, but with hundreds of thousands or millions of gamblers making what probably amount to hundreds of millions of bets, they will always win. The odds of every roll or every hand is very slightly in their favor, and that's what they count on over time to make money. Now, live poker, and I'm not talking about poker machines, but actually live poker, is a little different. Casinos are not involved in betting at all with poker. They're simply dealing the cards and taking a small cut of every hand or of the action. Some poker players will win big, others will lose big, but casinos will always take a very small cut on every game, and those wins, those cuts over time are what help make them rich. Now, sports gambling from a casino perspective is kind of a hybrid between blackjack and poker. So technically, when you make a bet, you are betting against the sports book. But the job of the sports book is to see to it that an equal number of dollars, not bettors, but dollars, are being bet on both teams. That's where they make their money. Now, I'll explain. So let's say there's a game, hypothetically, in 2019, actually, this will come up, with Miami at New England. Okay, on paper, this is going to be a total blowout. Now, if casinos were to just take a bet on who will win this game, 98 or maybe even $99.50 out of every 100 are going to be bet on the Patriots. And when, as is likely, the Patriots win, it would leave a disaster for the casino. So they can't take that bet. Remember, casinos make their money little bits at a time when equal number of dollars are bet on both teams. And here's how they do it. So they have 2 different ways of evening things out and making the betting on both teams roughly equal. The first is called the point spread. Now let me switch over to a real-life Week 1 2019 game, and that's the Broncos at Oakland to play the Raiders. The Raiders are the favorite in the game, so to make the betting equal, casinos basically gift the Broncos 2.5 points, which is what they've done. So let's say the Raiders win that game 30-28. The Raiders won the game, but from a betting perspective, if you took the Broncos, you got an extra 2.5 points, so you won the bet 30.5-30. That's how point spreads work. Now, when you made your bet and you took the Broncos and the 2.5 points, you probably saw a line of minus 110. What that means is that you needed $110 to win 100. That's the minus 110. Now, to make the numbers here a little easier, we'll just say $11 to win 10. The guy who took the Raiders and gave up 2.5 points, he also had a line of minus 110, and he also bet $11 to win 10. So combined, the two of you bet $22, 11 plus 11. You won the bet, so you won 21. You won your original $11 plus the 10 that you won, the 11 to win 10. The Raider better got nothing. So the two of you combined bet $22. You got 21 back. Where did the extra dollar go? The casino kept it as a service fee. That's how they make their money. Now, the other standard way to bet on football games is what's called the line. It's fairly similar to the minus 110 I just discussed above, except that with the line, there is no point spread, and to win your bet, you only need your team to win the game. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated, the numbers do, but let's go back to the Broncos at the Raiders. The Broncos are a plus 125 to win that game, and the Raiders are a minus 135. What that means is that if you want to bet on the Broncos, a $100 bet on the Broncos will win $125, and a $135 bet on the Raiders will win $100. Okay, that's how lines work, and basically the same type of thing on that spread between 125 and 135. That's where Vegas makes its money. All right, so now beyond the basics, casinos also try to spice things up with bets like parlays, where you pick anywhere from 2 to about 10 or even more games, and you win money based on the number of games that you win. You actually have to win all of the games, and if you win them all, that's why it's called a parlay. You win multiple times your money. So let's say you picked 2 games and won them both. You'll win 2 times 2, or about 4 times your money, less the casino take. If you picked 5 games and won, you'll win 2 to the 5th power. You'll win 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, or 32 times your money. In real life, it's usually closer to about 30 times your money because, the casino is going to get its take. But you get the idea. So finally, I want to make a quick admonishment if you're considering betting on NFL games. I spent 2 NFL seasons in Las Vegas trying to win money betting football in addition to my regular job. And it is a whole lot tougher than you think. On paper, you actually only need to win 52.5% of the time. That's the calculation I did a while back in order to make money, but it's so much tougher to do that, it's hard to even imagine. In fact, the better I got at analyzing games during those 2 seasons, the worse I actually did betting. And I kind of learned how extremely far away I was from being able to forecast games well enough to make money consistently. For me, I got to kind of where I was like a scratch golfer betting wise. Pretty decent, but I was nowhere near being a PGA pro and nowhere good enough to make money consistently, because it's only those PGA pros of bettors who are going to actually make money consistently. So, as entertainment, sports gambling can be a ton of fun. I love it. It can help amplify the fan experience on game day and just make for a lot more adrenaline in watching the NFL. But as an addiction or as a money-making career, just don't go there. Just don't. Have fun with it and keep things in moderation. Kevin, back to you.
All right, I must say I'm really excited to do this segment because this one is going to be on my Denver Broncos. Now, what I'm not so excited about is that I don't love the Denver Broncos this season. Yeah, they're my boys, they're my team, they're everything I love and cheer for in sports, but they're not going to be all that good. They unfortunately have the second toughest schedule, according to CBS. They have a new quarterback. They have a new coach. They have new schemes. They're like every single area practically that I look for in this show is not leaning towards the Broncos being very good. Now, actually, surprisingly, Pro Football Focus has a decent ranking of their offensive line, which actually blows me away a bit because I've watched, obviously, all of their preseason games, and I've not come away impressed with their offensive line. I mean, it's really a monstrous question mark for the team. And, okay, so maybe Pro Football Focus likes them, and that's who we've been going with so far, PFF, but don't count me as someone who really believes in this O-line. Now, first, obviously, as we have been, we got to look at this team starting with the quarterback. And as I'm sure most people know, they have a brand new quarterback who is, well, a kind of an old quarterback. Joe Flacco coming in from the Baltimore Ravens after being benched in place of rookie Lamar Jackson, who, needless to say, is not all that great of a passer, if not a very exciting quarterback in his own right. Flacco, if you just take a look at his stats over the last 4 seasons, so if you go back to 2015, and this is an interesting stat that I found on ProFootballTalk.com. If you look at the NFL average for quarterback percentage in 2015, the average was 90.2. Joe Flacco in 2015 had a quarterback rating, of 83.1. So 7 points below average. Not good. In 2016, the NFL average, 89.3. Joe Flacco, 83.5. In 2017, the NFL average, 86.9. Joe Flacco, 80.4. So we see 2 things. One is that, and I'm sorry, actually one more. 2018, the NFL average was 92.9, and Joe Flacco, 84.2. So there was a bit of a dip in production for the NFL period, but Joe Flacco has been well below average as an NFL quarterback for the last 4 seasons, and honestly, there's not a whole lot of reason to believe that's going to change. I would love to believe it's going to change. I would love to think that the Broncos are going to do better than their 6-10 record that they had in 2018, but I'm not loving it. So again, we're going with Tipico as a taking the lines and the final record that Tipico has for the Broncos is 7.5. So they say the Broncos will win 7.5 games, so we get to pick the over or the under. If they win 7 or fewer, that's the under. If they win 8 or more, that's the over. I say if I'm buying the Broncos, then that's betting the over. If I'm selling the Broncos, that's betting the under. And again, Tipico has that as 7.5 games. So let's see, what else do the Broncos have going on besides a quarterback who's just simply not very good? And the funny thing about Flacco, and again, being a Broncos fan myself, is to see that he was really not liked by Broncos fans since that heartbreaking playoff game back in 2014 that totally ripped out the hearts, 2013 that ripped out the hearts of Broncos fans. And he has a lot he has to do to earn goodwill and love from this fan base. And if he even struggles even a little bit, I think the fan base is going to throw him under the bus immediately. This is a fan base that is not happy. They've had 2 seasons in a row of losing seasons for the first time since the early 1970s. This team doesn't lose, and they've lost 2 seasons in a row. They've been under 500. So they're upset, and they don't want to go through it again. And if Joe Flacco doesn't succeed, they're in for some boo birds. Let's just say that. The offensive line, like we said, is ranked 12th by PFF, or predicted to be ranked 12th in 2019. That really surprises me. They've got major problems with their center, Connor McGovern, who has not been able to snap the ball reliably. Their run blocking has been deplorable in the preseason and in practice. Their pass blocking has been better. They got Jawan James from Miami, who should be a good right tackle because he's the highest paid right tackle in football. We'll see. Ron Leary once was a very good guard, but he has barely played for Denver because he's always hurt. He has not played this preseason either. You have a couple good guys. You have Dalton Reisner is really the guy that you like on that line, and he's a rookie, for goodness sake. Garrett Bowles is always making the same mistakes. Needless to say, the offensive line is ranked higher than I would have expected. Now, they have the second hardest schedule in the NFL, according to CBS. That obviously does not help. Part of it is because they had to play Kansas City twice and the Chargers twice. I believe I saw the other day, I think that the Chiefs have won, I think I saw that it was 7 straight games against the Broncos. They've been so bad in the last 2 or 3 years, the Denver Broncos, really since Peyton Manning left, and no huge surprise, but there's no real reason to believe that's going to change overnight here. I think that they are changing. There is a new culture, and it's being brought in by the first-year head coach, Vic Fangio, who is a very veteran defensive coordinator, he coached with the Bears, the 49ers, and others, and he's very well respected, and he looks like he's brought in a very nice culture. He's very mature. He has a nice way about him. He speaks the truth, and the players seem to respect him. He is also a very proven defensive coordinator, and I think he will change this defense around and bring them back to being one of the top defenses in the league. They have a very talented defense. They have Von Miller, Bradley Chubb as pass rushers. They have a good secondary and a good defensive line. So I think that the defense could be good, maybe even great, and that's something that Fangio can bring in. Now, the problem is they are in a new scheme. So Ed Donatel, Vic Fangio, these guys are starting fresh and, bringing in, veterans and rookies alike. And that's something that in this show we talk about players having to learn something new, not being comfortable with a scheme. Now, don't get me wrong, this scheme should be better than last year with Vance Joseph, and the coaching staff in general, but they still have to learn something new. They still have to get used to a new culture. They didn't have music in practices this year. These things sound ridiculous, but this is a change for these players. Now, maybe even it's a positive change, but it is a change, and it's something they have to get used to. And add that to a tough schedule, and you're looking at a hard time for the Denver Broncos in 2019. Now, the offense, they could struggle, and a lot of it's going to depend on health. Emmanuel Sanders is their number 1 wide receiver, and he could be a good number 1, but he's coming back from a serious injury. He looked good in the preseason, but we'll have to wait and see what actually happens with him. The tight ends, you have Noah Fant, was drafted in the first round this year, but he's been a bit banged up. Their second-round pick from a few years ago, Jake Butt, has been banged up. Jeff Hireman, another tight end, has been banged up. So you have a lot of these guys that they really rely on offense, and they're all banged up. Look at their wide receiver depth, and it's not fantastic. I mean, Courtland Sutton, I can tell you Broncos fans have a lot of hope in him, but he hasn't done much to prove anything yet. He's in his second year, so we'll see. Maybe he does. But then you have Deshaun Hamilton and Tim Patrick at 3 and 4, and it's nothing to sneeze at. Can Phillip Lindsay stay healthy and be a Pro Bowler again? We'll see. So the offense has so many question marks, and being led by Joe Flacco, he's nothing more than an under-average quarterback. He's below average. There's no other way of looking at him. He's a below-average quarterback. So in the end, how do I like this team? Do I like my own Denver Broncos? Do I think that they have a chance to go over that 7.5 wins? Can they win 8 games this season? Well, let's take a look at their schedule and see why exactly it is the second hardest in the NFL. They start the season at Oakland. That is an evening game, and then they play at home against Chicago. Boom, boom, tough. I think Oakland is not a good team this year, but at home, the first game, they're going to be tough to beat. I look at Oakland as being about as talented as the Denver Broncos. In some ways, not in all ways, don't get me wrong. The defense, for sure, for the Broncos is better, but the Oakland offense is better. They have Antonio Brown. Derek Carr is settled in. I think Derek Carr is a better quarterback, if even slightly better than Joe Flacco. Anyway, tough game, kind of a push. Then they play at home against Chicago, at Green Bay, at home against Jacksonville, at the LA Chargers, at home against Tennessee. So there are actually some winnable games there. I don't love Jacksonville, and I don't love Tennessee. You can check that out. You can check out my whole review of the AFC South, which is also right now on YouTube. Tennessee and Jacksonville, I don't love. They play at home against Kansas City, which is a brutal game. And then they play at Indianapolis, which, as we all know, was going to be a scheduled loss, in my opinion. But now, of course, Andrew Luck retiring makes this a whole different ballgame. So maybe that could be an added win, which makes me just lean slightly more towards a push for the Denver Broncos with that 7.5 mark. Now, Cleveland, and then a bye. So they have a bye in a good place. I think 10, 11, 12 is a good place to have a bye week. Then they play at Minnesota, at Buffalo, at home against the Chargers, at Houston, at Kansas City, at home against Detroit, and then at home against Oakland. A really tough second half. Minnesota's a good team. I think Buffalo is better than people are giving them credit for. Again, you can check out Buffalo and all the AFC East in another YouTube video for the Footballogists AFC East show. Tough schedule. It's not brutal. I think it's actually gotten a little bit easier because I think the AFC South is not as good as some people think. I think Tennessee is beatable, Jacksonville is beatable, and I think Indianapolis is now beatable. So it all depends on the Denver Broncos defense and if the offense can even be average. If the offense can be average, this is a team that could win 8 games. It could win more than 8 games. Joe Flacco has a high ceiling. He is a Super Bowl MVP. He has led teams to the playoffs, and he has been part of a very good team. He has been a good quarterback in the past. Not necessarily statistically, but he had that one incredible run in the playoffs, and so it shows he does have that ceiling. Now, the rest of the offense, there's so much to prove, it's really hard to judge, and mostly with the offensive line. But if we're going with Pro Football Focus, as we have been with our shows, they're ranked 12th, which means they're above average. They're an above average offensive line according to Pro Football Focus. If you look at that, if you look at Emmanuel Sanders, seemingly healthy, Noah Fant, hopefully healthy, maybe they will be an average offense. And so actually, the more I've gone into this team and looked at their schedule and preparing for this show, I actually look at them as more of a push. And I came in to this show absolutely expecting to sell them. I did not think they were going to win more than 7 games. I thought 7 was the max they would win, but the schedule actually lightens up a bit for them. I mean, they could beat Indianapolis, Jacksonville, Tennessee. And if you beat Oakland once, then you're looking at a relatively decent schedule to get 8. That said, honestly, I would not bet the Denver Broncos. I don't like this line. I don't like 7.5. I think it's too close. I think they're going to flirt around 7 and 8. And that being the case, I would stay away from them. Don't bet the Broncos. This isn't their year. They're not going to be great, and they're not going to be terrible. They have a good defense. They have a veteran quarterback. And honestly, as a Broncos fan, I don't love that. The 7 and 9, 8 and 8 is like the worst nightmare for fans because you don't get a high draft pick, and of course, you don't go to the playoffs. So the Broncos at 7.5, I am pushing. Don't buy it. Don't sell it. Just don't bet the Denver Broncos, though. Of course, between you and me, I am hoping they go to the playoffs and win 12 games. But as a professional, I will not tell you either way. Don't bet them. And up next, we will talk about the Oakland Raiders. Typical has them at 5.5 wins, coming off a 4-win 2018. Can John Gruden lead them to any sort of respectability? We'll find out after this. So, the Oakland Raiders. They're kind of a tough one. This is kind of funny. I literally had to check to make sure that John Gruden had only coached there 1 year. Because it feels like forever. Because there's so much drama, always, all the time with Gruden and the Raiders, that it feels like he's been there definitely more than just a season and a half. So, we'll have to see what he brings to the team. They won 4 games last year in a clear rebuild. But a rebuild where, they're keeping Derek Carr, who's really one of the worst quarterbacks in football statistically. At least if you're looking at QBR, he was 27th in the NFL. That was only ahead, I think, of Blake Bortles and Case Keenum. Not good. Not good at all. So, if they really want to rebuild this team, it's not for 2019. They're just not there. They're not ready. They're not going to be competitive. Now, that being said, they went out and got Antonio Brown, which is kind of like, okay, what? I mean, why go and get this airhead diva who's a great talent? Don't get me wrong. He's a great wide receiver. But you're not ready to compete, so you're just going to pay him? I mean, do they think they're ready to compete? And do they think they're playoff bound? I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, these owners have been crazy for decades now, honestly. And I know I've got to try not to be biased here as a Broncos fan. But really, though, Derek Carr was at 27th in QBR. His record as a quarterback is 32-46. That's not great. And he's been healthy. That's a positive. He's been very predictable. He's been a guy who's been out there a lot. I think he is a drama-free guy. Seems like a good dude, but he hasn't been a great quarterback. Now, part of that is because he's had a terrible offensive line and hasn't had a ton of weapons around him. So I imagine that's what they're thinking. Hey, we'll bring in Antonio Brown, and that will help Derek Carr immediately. Except, okay, Antonio Brown is already having off-the-field issues and on-the-field issues. The guy just froze his feet, for goodness sake, and now can't find the correct helmet. I mean, it's totally ridiculous. It's a clown show. Add to that they're part of this Hard Knocks series on HBO, and John Gruden is trying, it seems, to be the star of the show. It's really bizarre. And again, you add that to Derek Carr being a below average quarterback, absolutely, at least in his past. The O-line ranked by Pro Football Focus is the 26th in the NFL. It's a bad offensive line. They were a terrible defense in 2018. This is not a team that's looking like they're going to do much in this season. I mean, again, this is a funny thing. Before I really did research into the Raiders, I was going to buy their 5.5. That was my instinct. My instinct was to buy them. My instinct was to sell the Broncos and buy the Raiders because the Raiders have been in the news all the time. You hear all of these, not necessarily positive things, but they're in your mind. That they're part of what you hear every day on ESPN and in NFL circles. And so I think that just eventually pushed me towards saying, oh, I bet they're going to be better this year. But when I look at, again, the pieces that we always look at on this show, which is the coaching staff, the scheme, is it new? Do they have drama in the locker room? How are their injuries, etc.? It's not good. I mean, the team, they gave up the most points in the NFL in 2018. They were the worst defense in 2018. They got a couple guys on defense. They drafted a guy who was maybe the most annoying person I've ever seen in my life on Hard Knocks, Abrams. And again, I know I sound totally biased as a Broncos fan, but go watch it. I go watch it, and I tell you, you're going to think the same, that this guy was just, again, he's just hamming it up for the cameras. Like, makes it, it's just annoying. Go watch it. Now, what I do like Josh Jacobs. I think he's going to be a really good running back, and I think that he's bound for a good year, maybe a great year at running back, because they're going to run him and ride him a lot. I think he'll get some passes out of the backfield, etc. But will that be enough behind the 26th ranked offensive line? Can Derek Carr do enough on offense? Now, they do have Antonio Brown. Tyrell Williams comes over from the LA Chargers. They have Hunter Renfrow, a rookie slot receiver. So I think they could do something on offense. They could be decent, but I don't see them being anywhere good enough to overcome what should be, again, a bottom 5 defense. So they're going to give up a ton of points, so they may put up some yards. Jacobs, I think, is going to score some touchdowns, but yeah, you add that to this drama of Antonio Brown might not even play. The guy might not even play. I mean, he goes and he has this brain-dead decision to walk into a cryotherapy freezing chamber without shoes on. I mean, I think he had socks on, froze off the 2 bottom layers of his feet. That's not a good look. Now, again, a talented guy, but is he going to play? Is he going to get along with John Gruden, who appears himself to be trying to get all the attention? He does. Go watch Hard Knocks. I sound like an Oakland hater, but watch it yourself. Now, add all of this to them having the hardest schedule in the NFL. That's according to CBS. The hardest schedule in the NFL. The Oakland Raiders, I think they're going to be hard-pressed to win 5 games this year. And again, Tipico has them at 5.5. So we've got to decide, are we going to buy or sell the Raiders? And I know I have to take all of my prejudices and Oakland hatred out of my soul as a Denver fan. Can they win 6 games? Let's see. Who are they playing? At home against Denver, at home against Kansas City. Denver is kind of a push. Could win, could lose. Kansas City, no. And then they play at Minnesota, at Indianapolis, at home against Chicago. Indy might be a little more winnable now, but they're still better than Oakland. They have an early bye in week 6, and then at Green Bay, at Houston, at home against Detroit, at home against Chargers, at home against Cincinnati. That's a decent run where they could win could win 2 out of those 3. Detroit and Cincinnati not being great. Still, yeah, I mean, Detroit's got Matthew Stafford, who should just tear apart Oakland in warm weather. At the Jets, at Kansas City, at home against Tennessee, at home against Jacksonville, at the Chargers, and at Denver. So, when I look at this again, I see this schedule being easier than CBS does. Again, CBS ranks it as the hardest schedule in the NFL, and I don't necessarily see that. Indianapolis is going to be easier. Detroit's not a terrible team. I'm sorry, they are not a great team. They're not a terrible matchup, I should say. Cincinnati is beatable, absolutely. Might be the second worst team in football next to Miami. Tennessee and Jacksonville, I don't love. Again, check it out in my AFC South video. What do they have? Nick Foles, okay, maybe. They got a good defense, but yeah. If anyone, maybe Jacksonville's going to be tough. Tennessee's, I don't see it. Marcus Mariota, Ryan Tannehill, no. Now, are they better than Oakland? Yeah, probably. Oakland seems to me like a team that they're such a spark plug. Like they're a team that could totally blow up or totally take a step in the next direction. Now, they're not going to be great in 2019. I don't think anyone thinks that. I don't think anyone thinks they're going to reach 500. So the question is, are they going to win 5 games or less or 6 games or more? That's really our decision right now. Typical has them at 5.5. What's our pick for that? My gut tells me to pick the under, to sell the Raiders. My gut tells me that they are going to implode on themselves. That they are going to everything's going to go wrong. They have Vontaze Burfict and Antonio Brown in the same locker room. John Gruden. Their GM is already throwing Antonio Brown under the bus right after the head coach defended him. It's totally chaos in there. I don't see that as a winning culture. And that is a lot what the show is about. Do you see that as a winning locker room? I don't. So when I look at this schedule, it's hard enough. They have a bad defense. They have an okay, possibly offense. And that's only if Antonio Brown actually plays. So if you have to bet that, I'm selling it. I say they win 5 games or less. I don't love the bet. It's not one of my favorites like a few from the other divisions have been, but it's a solid bet. I think they will win less than 6 games. So I'm selling the Oakland Raiders, and it's not just because I hate the Oakland Raiders. It's because of everything going on in the locker room, their defense, and an offense that has a long way to go to prove they can be anything other than mediocre, especially with Derek Carr at quarterback. Up next, the cream of the crop, the team that everyone has just decided to love, and the quarterback that will be the next Tom Brady mixed with Brett Favre and Peyton Manning and everyone else, but better, at least according to the national media. That's Pat Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll talk about them up next. The KC Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, I guess you could say third-year quarterback, really in his second year in Kansas City, taking over, of course, for Alex Smith. And the guy was an absolute wunderkind last year, set all sorts of records, especially in the beginning of the year. It just really every week he was setting some sort of record. In fantasy, I believe he was 100 points better than the second-place quarterback. Absolutely absurd. The guy was sick. He made every play imaginable. He looked freakish. He's an athlete that can make every throw. He can run. He can pass with his left hand. The guy can do it all. So he immediately immediately makes the Kansas City Chiefs a good bet. Now, it does depend, though, what the line is. So last year they went 12-4. Tipico has them at 10.5 wins this year. Now, Pat Mahomes may have been unbelievably good, but if you watched his games, which I did, and if you watch a lot of his tape, he made some really questionable passes. Now, most of them actually worked out, which was pretty unbelievable. It was kind of like Brett Favre, where he just somehow pulled miraculous plays out of his backside. Now, Brett Favre also, I think, still holds the record for the most interceptions all time because, well, he pulled things from his backside. And I think that's what Patrick Mahomes does sometimes. He makes these throws across his body that's like, huh? What are you doing? Or he runs to his right and then passes left. Now, he pulled most of them off, but eventually that doesn't work. As we all know, you've got to pass from the pocket, and you've got to find ways to run the offense from on-schedule plays and rhythmic plays, etc. Now, a lot of that has to do with having a good offensive line, but obviously has to have a quarterback that wants to do that. Now, if anyone can do it out of the pocket, it's probably Mahomes. Kind of like Aaron Rodgers, they're going to make these plays better than everyone else, and they're kind of the exception to the rule of staying in the pocket. Still, I do truly believe he's a guy who, if he continues to make those passes, some of them are going to come back and hurt him. Some of them are going to cost him games. Now, some of them are going to win him games, of course, like they did last year. So it all comes down to, okay, do we really trust that he is going to be as good as he was last year? It's hard to imagine that he could. Now, it's hard to imagine that he could be as good as he was last year either. So, he's kind of a push in himself. I think he's so talented that it's hard to bet against him. It truly is. And if you put him in an offense with Andy Reid, who's just really, truly one of the best offensive coordinators of all time, he's a good coach. He's not a great in-game coach. He's kind of famously bad for in-game decisions. But as a coordinator, as an offensive schemer, there's no one better. There's just not. And if you put him with Patrick Mahomes and with the talent of Hill, of Tyreek Hill, Kelsey, Sammy Watkins, even Damian Williams at running back, they're going to be nearly impossible to beat. And we've seen that. We saw that obviously last year. And this is a team that even had success with Alex Smith. And when you put a really uberly talented quarterback there, it just opens up every type of play calling for Andy Reid, and he's going to use it. Now, the things you question about this team are the offensive line, which was ranked 17th by Pro Football Focus going into 2019. So it's okay. It's below average, just barely below average. Now, they also had the 24th ranked defense in 2018. So not good. They were one of the worst defenses in football, and that was partly why Patrick Mahomes had so many numbers, because he was always having to just put up gigantic games because his defense was so terrible. Now, I think they might get a little bit better this year. They brought in Steve Spagnuolo, excuse me. He's the first year at the defensive coordinator position, but that's not really necessarily a good thing. Maybe he's going to bring this aggressive style of defense that might in the future work for them, but he brought in an entirely new scheme. They're now going into a 4-3 scheme, and that's something that the players have to completely relearn. Now, obviously not all of them. Many of them have already played in that scheme, but it is something new. It's something that they're going to have to refresh in their minds and their muscle memories, and they're going to have to really work on playing together in this scheme. And they did bring in guys like Frank Clark on the defensive line, and they brought in Tyrann Mathieu as a safety. If Matthew's one of those guys who continually gets hurt, so we'll see if he can even stay on the field. But they're a defense that's not going to be great. They're maybe not going to be as bad as 24th again, but I wouldn't look at the new coordinator as being a plus in 2019. Maybe in the future, but to take that all new is, as we've been saying for this entire show and series, that is in general a negative. Sometimes it works. Sometimes rookie coaches can immediately turn things around, but more often than not, it takes at least a year for players to figure it out. Now, that being said, again, this is a great offense, and they have the 5th hardest strength of schedule, again, according to CBS Sports. But, the schedule that everyone is so worried about, or that at least CBS appears to be worried about, is not one that terrifies me. They start the season at Jacksonville, at Oakland. I mean, win-win. And those are 2 on the road. At home against Baltimore, it's at home. They have one of the best home field advantages in football. At Detroit, winnable. At home against Indy, winnable. Houston at home, again, at home. At Denver, winnable. At home against Green Bay, at home against Minnesota, at Tennessee, at the Chargers, at home against Oakland, at New England, at home against Denver, at Chicago, and at home against the Chargers. So a lot of their tough games are at home, and as we all know, playing in Arrowhead, especially in the wintertime, is a really, really tough place to play. This is going to be a tough team to beat. That is a very, very loud crowd with a very good quarterback that they absolutely have fallen in love with now, and that's going to motivate them more. This is a team that they know has Super Bowl aspirations. Now, do I believe that they are good enough for the Super Bowl? No, because, again, you need defense to win championships, at least to some level. So this is a team that will undoubtedly get to the playoffs because, it's not that great of a division, and honestly, the AFC is kind of ripe for the picking, which we will continue to talk about in our future podcasts. The line for the Kansas City Chiefs to win the Super Bowl is 9-1. That's, it's an okay bet, but again, I don't love them. I wouldn't pick them. Just not good enough defense. They're a season or two away if they have a couple good off seasons to really putting it together and becoming that team. If they do so, if they have a couple more good drafts, if they continue to bring in good, solid veteran presences on offense and defense, they're going to be a dynasty. One way or another, if it's a dynasty that wins Super Bowls, or if it's a dynasty in the AFC West, if it's a dynasty in the conference, we will find out, but it is absolutely heading for a dynasty. Why? Because they have right now, a young, cheap quarterback who's great, and a great head coach, which I talk over and over about, those being the most important things. And they have a young, cheap quarterback who is, at the moment, putting up Hall of Fame numbers. So you have the best of both worlds. A guy who's like Hall of Fame caliber at the moment, and he's cheap, so you can build a team around him. That's perfect. That's the perfect case scenario for the next few years. And boy, do they have to take advantage of it right now. And if they don't, well, that's, obviously on them. I mean, geez, his contract is for 4 years, $16.42 million. That ends in 2021. I mean, that's the steal of the century at the moment. And boy, they got to take advantage, like the LA Rams have taken advantage of Jared Goff. And he is not even, at least seemingly, half the quarterback that Patrick Mahomes is. So, again, the question comes down to, okay, do we buy the over or the under? Do we buy them or do we sell them? At 10.5, that's another really good line. I think that's a tough line to set because 10 wins are under, 11 wins are over. 11 wins is a lot of wins. Now, they won 12 last year, but I do believe that Mahomes is going to lose them a couple because of his crazy throws that he makes. Now, I do also think that the defense is going to improve slightly, and I think, the offense is going to only get better and better as they get more comfortable with each other. So I'm really honestly a push on this again. It's a hard bet because that 10.5 is a hard line to bet because winning 11 or over is really hard to predict for anyone. They have a tough schedule. They play the Chargers twice. I'm talking myself into buying them though, because when I look at the schedule again, a lot of their toughest games are at home. They're really good at home. So I'm gonna buy them. I know I'm changing my mind a bit. I had them as a push. I'm gonna buy them at 10.5. I think the Chiefs are gonna win at least 11 games. So I would buy them. I think that's an okay bet, but as you see, it just changed my mind. So I'm not really, really confident about it, but it's a solid bet because again, their tough games are at home. Their offense is great. Could be one of the greatest offenses of all time. It really could. I mean, with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, they could break all sorts of numbers in the next few years, and they probably will. And so if their defense can be average, then this team could really go places and could really win a lot of games, even though it's a tough schedule. So I will buy the Kansas City Chiefs. Like it, don't love it, but feel fairly confident in betting it. Okay, last but not least, up next we have the LA Chargers. Did you know that Phillip Rivers has more kids than he does playoff appearances? In fact, he's got 2 more kids than he does playoff appearances. 9 kids, 7 playoff appearances. We will have more factual information about Phillip Rivers and the LA Chargers after this quick break. Phillip Rivers is one of my favorite guys in the NFL. Andrew Luck as well, unfortunately. Now he's gone. So Rivers he's kind of like 1A. Deshaun Watson is up there too. They're both good dudes, guys I just like. I just love their leadership. I like how they're on the field. I think Phillip Rivers is a bit whiny, especially coming from a Broncos fan, but I like him. I like who he is and how he acts. I love his accent. And he's a good quarterback. And he's been a good quarterback for a long time. And he's coming into that time of his career where he knows he's got to win. He's got to have one. He's becoming the John Elway, really. And now he's had even less success, obviously, than John Elway. He's 3-4 in the playoffs. That's bad, obviously. Now, that and in a long, illustrious career, too. And so it's his time. I think he deserves something, at least a playoff run, and he has the talent around him to do it. Now, unfortunately, one of those talented guys, Melvin Gordon, his star running back, is holding out for more money and might actually not play in 2019. So that is a big-time no-no, a big con for the season, and it makes it fairly hard to bet them. Now, last year they went 12-4. Tipico has them at 9.5. Now, I imagine they have them at 9.5 wins because Melvin Gordon is sitting out, because I truly believe they are a better team than 9.5. They were 12-4 last year, and they're only better this season. They don't have that brutal of a schedule, and they have they've got a good coach. They don't have drama. That you just never hear anything out of there that's bad, except, yes, the Melvin Gordon holdout. So I think that is where all the drama, that's where any negativity you hear is coming from him, and it's because, well, the guy wants to get paid, and they just don't feel like paying him because running backs are somewhat, dispensable. Now, I don't love their team around, without Gordon. Excuse me, I should say their running game. I like their team, but not their running game. I mean, right now, if you look, and I'm looking at CBS right now, that's just for some reason the site I have pulled up, and they have no running back as their starter. I don't know if this is just because it's they're just hoping that eventually it's going to be Melvin Gordon, and they have Austin Eckler as their number 2. Now, Eckler was really solid when he had time last season, but I don't look at him as being a bell cow type of guy, a guy who's going to cover, carry the ball a lot and carry your team to much of a success. So that has me worried a bit. Now, other than that, he's got some really good talent. He's got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams as, I think, a very good, legit 1-2 punch at wide receiver. Hunter Henry is back and healthy. He is a good tight end, a good receiving tight end, a really good red zone target. Virgil Green, a longtime Bronco. He's a good blocking tight end. Occasionally makes a catch. They're solid. Their offensive line, where is their offensive line? Their offensive line is a major problem. That's right. I remember that when I was doing the prep for this, there was something else that was really wrong with this team. The Chargers in 2018 had the 30th ranked offensive line according to Pro Football Focus. In 2019, they've gotten so much better as to go up one place to the 29th ranked offensive line. Obviously, that is a major problem. If you can't give Phillip Rivers time, if you can't block for whoever is in at running back, you're going to have issues. Now, that didn't really stop them last year with the 30th placed offensive line. They still won 4 games. They lost 4 games. They won 12 games. And I think that they can do that again, absolutely. I think the Chargers are one of my favorite teams, actually, in the AFC, period. I love their coaching. They've got Anthony Lynn. He's in his 3rd season as head coach. He's really been a great coach. I love the vibe, the maturity, just the chutzpah he brings to that team. Ken Wisenhunt is going to his 4th year at offensive coordinator. The guy has 29 years of NFL experience. He's really been an OC for everyone, it seems, which not always a good thing, but he's at least got tons of experience, and he's got experience with this offense with Phillip Rivers. Gus Bradley is in his 3rd season at defensive coordinator. He's got 10 years of NFL experience. So they've got tons of experience at the head coach position, the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. It's a coaching staff that looks ready to make that run. That they could do it this year. You can just feel it. They have that feel about them when you watch their practices, when you watch their preseason games. They're ready. I've seen over and over in this research I've done for this team, people love their defense. They've got the number 1 ranked defense by multiple sites. I believe that was ESPN, CBS, Pro Football Talk. Don't quote me on that. It may be different sites, but I remember at least 3 different sites that had the LA Chargers having the number one defense. Now, I believe a few of those were before their star safety Derwin James got hurt. Unfortunately, he broke his foot and will miss at least a large portion of the season. That's brutal. He was a huge factor last year, but they're still a very good defense. They're a defense that will be at least in the top three. And so when you can say that and you have a great quarterback and a very good coach, it's again a team that's it's built to win. And I believe they're built to go even far in the playoffs. Now, not everyone agrees with me. Part of that is because of their offensive line, but in my opinion, that is why you should bet them. Now, to win the Super Bowl, they're 15-1. So, yeah, they've got solid odds. I don't think I'd bet that. That's not really good enough. But you see that at least at Tipico that they're believing a bit in the Chargers to go that far. But they're not believing in them to win 10 games? Really? They've got the Chargers at 9.5 wins. That is surprising to me because, again, this is a very good team with a very good quarterback, a very good defense. They start the season at home against Indianapolis and then at Detroit, at home against Houston, at Miami, at home against Denver. That could definitely be a 5-0 record. Now, Houston's fairly tough, but Houston's got a terrible offensive line against a really good defensive front, and it's at home, so I think that absolutely could be a win. Then they're at home against Pittsburgh. Again, tough game, but at home. They're at Tennessee, at Chicago. Chicago, okay, tough game. At home against Green Bay. Okay, tough, but at home. At Oakland, at home against Kansas City, at Denver, at Jacksonville, at home against Minnesota, at home against Oakland, and at Kansas City. So you see some tough games, but again, similar to Kansas City, a lot of the tough games are at home. They've got Green Bay at home. They've got Pittsburgh at home. Of course, they've got Kansas City at home. They'll obviously play Kansas City on the road. The last game of the season is at Kansas City, which is obviously going to be really, or I shouldn't say obviously, it absolutely should be like the premier game that week. The AFC West is probably going to come down to that last week between Kansas City and the LA Chargers. But before that, you're at home against Minnesota, Oakland, at Jacksonville, at Denver. Those are all wins. Those are 4 wins in a row. So I really look at this team as over. I totally buy this record. This is one of my favorite buys of the entire season I've seen so far. So far, this is our third division. We've done the AFC South and the AFC East already. There have been a couple of those. I love betting the under on Miami. I love betting the over on Buffalo. And this is another one I love. This is my favorite for sure in the AFC West is the LA Chargers. Tipico, again, has them at 9.5. I'm totally buying that. I'm totally buying the over. I love them at 10. I think that they're going to go a long way. This is their season. Now, are they going to win the Super Bowl? Who knows? Are they going to go far in the playoffs? We'll find out. I kind of hope so because I'm a fan of Phillip Rivers. I think he deserves something, at least a run. Maybe not a Super Bowl, but a run that gets him close. Give him a couple wins. Get him at least an over 500 record in the playoffs. The guy deserves it. The coaching staff deserves it. They are a good coaching staff, and a lot of this is going to fall to if Melvin Gordon comes back. Now, at this point, I think we can't assume he will, but if the team knows that they're one player away from really being a championship contender, then maybe they will make it work. And if they make it work, then the line is absolutely going to shoot up. So now is the time to buy the Chargers. If Gordon comes back, it's going to jump a game, almost for sure. It'll probably go to 10.5. So right now is the time to do it. Even without Gordon, I think they can win 10 games. I absolutely love them at 10 games, and I am buying them as one of my favorites and absolutely my favorite in the AFC West in terms of total wins, according to Tipico.com. That is all I've got for our betting side of the show. We'll have one more short segment covering the fantasy in the AFC West. Now, this week, or these next few weeks until the regular season, we'll cover more of your yearly fantasy guys that we just think you should keep an eye on. But then during the regular season, we'll cover daily fantasy, and then we will cover your weekly spreads. We're going to cover every game against the spread every single week. We'll say who we like against who we think is going to win, and why we think they're going to win, always with a focus on the human factor. Travel, injuries, Antonio Brown being a butt, these types of things. So that's what we're going to cover. But up next, to end the show, a little bit of fantasy. All right, wrap up the show. We'll talk a little fantasy, and this is an interesting division because there are some of the best players in all the fantasy football. This is, again, yearly fantasy football with normal PPR leagues. Pat Mahomes led all quarterbacks by like 100 points, so he should go higher than any other quarterback by a long shot. I've seen him going in the top 10. Now, I think that's a bit too high, but it's not totally insane. I mean, if you're that much better than everyone else in your group, kind of makes sense. So am I saying that's what you should do? No, but I get it. Obviously, Tyreek Hill is another guy. He's being drafted sometimes as your number 1 wide receiver, sometimes at least in your top 3. There's no reason to think that he shouldn't be that. He's kind of your wild card. He's not going to miss any games to suspension. He's got the quarterback. He's got the coach. He's got guys around him that'll help take receivers away. The guy should do it all, and he should just put up monster numbers yet again. They're really the only two. I mean, obviously, also Kelsey. So look at this offense. They have top quarterback, one of the top receivers, and the top tight end. Kelsey, obviously, is also the number 1 tight end, and it's not really close. I guess you have Kelsey, and then you have Kittle, and then it's a fairly big step off from there. They have Zach Ertz, typically at your number 3, but I think he's a fairly big step back from Kittle and Kelsey, and we'll see if Kittle is as good, not in the Scangarello specifically offense. And now that also that San Francisco has a little bit more weapons, I think Kittle will get less targets. Kelsey's just in that high-powered offense, and he's gonna eat, he's gonna feed, and he's gonna be a guy that scores regularly for the Kansas City Chiefs. So those guys really, take him when you will. I like Kelsey even in the top 10 also. Now, there are so many good running backs, really, really good running backs in the top 5 or 6 that it's hard to take him, above that. But again, he's so much better than everyone else besides Kittle. I'd say one of those two, and I don't mind taking Kelsey in the top 10. So really, the Chiefs have 3 guys that could potentially go in the top 10, which is pretty crazy, actually. Let's say for the Raiders, I wouldn't touch anyone except for, Antonio Brown, I suppose, anywhere too high. And Brown, honestly, I would sell Brown. He's too dangerous for me. He's too much of an airhead with a coach that's also kind of a hothead. And he's a guy who is not playing with Ben Roethlisberger anymore. He's playing with Derek Carr. And heck, maybe it works, but I would be a little scared, a little leery of him actually performing like everyone thinks he will, like he has in Pittsburgh for so many years. So grain of salt with Antonio Brown. Be a little careful with him. If you have someone a little more predictable in front, say even, DeAndre Hopkins for me is a no-brainer in front of him. Tyreek Hill should go in front of Brown. And then, my opinion is Julio Jones and Devontae Adams also. And then maybe Mike Evans could go in front of him too. That's a little more of a question mark. But these guys are all guys that I think should be drafted ahead of Antonio Brown. So get him in the right position, obviously, and that goes with everyone on this list. But I would sell him where he's going in the ADP at the moment. For the Broncos, I wouldn't draft anyone. Actually, excuse me, I forgot Josh Jacobs. He's a guy to look at in the late rounds. He's the rookie running back for the Oakland Raiders, a guy who's falling pretty far, and a guy you absolutely keep your eye on. He's going to get plenty of carries and should get a chance to at least get a lot of repetitions, a lot of reps, not running with a good offensive line and an offense that's fairly questionable at this point, but I think he still should be a very solid running back and worth a flyer in the late middle rounds. For the Broncos, I would only even consider Emmanuel Sanders, who I think is actually really a guy out of the wide receiving core, I should say, is a guy who is falling also, but looks healthy and looks really good out there. I've watched a lot of his practices, and his game, in the second or third preseason game, looked really, really solid. Looks like a guy who's got his explosiveness back and could have a really big year in this offense if Flacco trusts him. Noah Fant, really late round flyer. If you're in a deep league, I think he could be a solid red zone fixture and a guy who could thrive in this, rollout type offense with Joe Flacco, who also loves his tight ends, but I wouldn't risk it too high with Noah Fant. There are too many tight ends that should be drafted ahead of him realistically. For the Broncos, Philip Lindsay's actually going higher than I expected. Not, really high, but kind of middle rounds. I'd be a little careful with him. He's so small. He's a little injury prone. Obviously, he got hurt at the end of last year. And I would like to see something out of him again before I picked him too high. There's so many decent starting running backs. And Philip Lindsay's going to be splitting a lot of time with Royce Freeman. So both of them, not guys I love. I would probably sell both of them. I would buy Emmanuel Sanders. Finally, for the Chargers, obviously Phillip Rivers is always a solid quarterback. Is he good fantasy-wise? He's usually predictable. Let's see what they have him listed as. He's listed as the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He's the 9th ranked quarterback according to Yahoo, at least. Quarterbacks, so many of them are so closely packed together, but Mahomes obviously ahead of the rest, and then Roethlisberger, Ryan Brees a bit ahead of the others. But Rivers falls into that kind of that second tier, maybe even your third tier, because really it's Mahomes and then a second tier and then a third tier. So draft him, in the proper rounds. He's going to go around guys like Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, perhaps Tom Brady, Kirk Cousins. But don't draft him, obviously, too high. Melvin Gordon, I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole because it's very possible he sits out the entire year like Le'Veon Bell. I drafted Le'Veon Bell last year, and I regretted it. I did not win my league because I drafted Le'Veon Bell. So I would be careful with Melvin Gordon. And, of course, Keenan Allen is a very, very solid guy he was injured 1 year, and that kind of gives him a bad rap as being injury-prone, but he's a guy who is just really solid. He shows up every season, and he's at a good spot. He's a guy who often falls fairly well down the wide receiver ranks. I mean, he's below. I see sometimes below Tyler Lockett even. Absolutely a guy who should be picked in the maybe third tier of wide receivers. All right, that's all I got for you today. Stay tuned for the next episode. We'll be covering the AFC North. A little bit of some Baker Mayfield action, and how bad are the Cincinnati Bengals going to be? Are they going to be the worst team in football, or will that honor go to the Miami Dolphins? Well, we'll talk about that in our next episode. Until then, thanks for listening to the Footballogists. I'm Kevin Gillikin for the Skipper Dude. Y'all have a great day, evening, morning,